Well, finally happened, timid investors. My neighbor told me I should not be renting my apartment and instead I should get myself to a hotel. But in fact, the apartment was illegal. Stay tuned for the full story. Hold on, I need to get dressed for this one. In this video, I'll discuss over-tourism in Europe more generally and in Madrid, Spain specifically. If you're new here, this is Tara from the channel She Saves, He Invests, They Travel, bringing travel tips and finance stories ordinary people can relate to. Part 1. The broader context. Unless you've been living under a rock, then you've probably seen the news and heard about stories of over-tourism, either places that claim to be destroyed by over-tourism or anti-tourist protests. I mean, just look at these headlines. Islands in Greece and cities like Paris and Venice are straining under the seasonal sudden influx of millions without the infrastructure to support it. And cities like Amsterdam are tired of the bad behavior from tourists. According to a variety of sources, the most popular destinations have been France, Spain, and the US. These countries usually land in the top 10 most visited countries each year. Just look at this UN infographic. Look at how big the bubbles are over Europe. The size of the bubble represents the amount of tourists the country receives. Yes, there are large bubbles over North America, but not as large as Europe. There are so many large bubbles over Europe that you can't even see the continent. And places like the US have more capacity to handle tourists. And you might have heard about a housing crisis in a city near you. Guess what? The housing crisis is also global, with some places experiencing it worse than others. You might also have heard YouTubers, TikTokers, and journalists complain about the cost of living crisis.
It'll get worse before it gets
is
better.
affecting all of us, but in Japan, shoppers have been used to decades of stable
Germany's
falling
economy is
prices.
struggling.
So when inflation finds
Everything in Dublin.
Everything Dublin's expensive.
It is. I was just there.
Which also appears to be global. Some people think these issues are related. Let me explain. Cost of living and quality of life are related, but also separate issues that are both affected by tourism. Spain receives tens of millions of visitors each year. In 2022, the UN reported that Spain received 71,659,000 visitors. The units are in thousands. According to another source, in 2023, Spain received more than 84 million tourists. Either way, that's a lot of additional people to handle for a country of only about 48 million residents, and the numbers appear to be increasing. Locals can't afford to live in their cities anymore and feel crowded out by the millions of visitors they receive each year. Recently, anti-tourist protests have erupted in the Canary Islands, the Balearic Islands, Valencia, Malaga, and Barcelona. Barcelona is only home to 1.6 million residents, but receives more than 10 million visitors each year, and that number keeps rising. Starting in the summer of 2023, because of a severe water shortage, Barcelona restricted the water usage of its residents, and the claim was that it did not do so for tourists because hotels still had functioning pools and golf courses were exempt. This isn't entirely true though. Everyone was restricted. Still, this is an example of how scarce resources can be strained because there are so many people. In the summer of 2024, some Barcelona residents sprayed tourists with squirt guns as a form of protest. Locals in Mallorca have even made fake signs to deter tourists. Also, there is the problem of bad behavior. Public drunkenness, massive impromptu street drinking parties called botellones, tourists destroying property, vomiting and urinating in public, etc. I'll link to this article about tourists binge drinking and Spanish resorts limiting them to 6 drinks per day. And the binge drinking can put a strain on the Spanish healthcare services, as emergency vehicles and services have to be used for tourists who have drunk so much that they have fallen and hit their heads or fallen from balconies. In Malaga, billboards advise tourists to start wearing clothing in public and stop disrespecting monuments and throwing trash in the street. Moving over to Madrid, you would think the problem is less severe here because Madrid attracts far fewer tourists than Barcelona, and most of those tourists are from other parts of Spain. Hold on, I was operating off outdated information. Those were 2020-2021 stats when I immigrated to Spain. The tourism numbers are much higher now, at Barcelona levels, and international tourists actually make up a slight majority now at 54%. I was surprised to learn that the largest international group visiting Madrid was US Americans. This explains a lot, actually. I was really underestimating how overwhelmed Madrid was. I thought Madrid was usually overlooked as a travel and immigration destination. Also, Madrid has the largest population in Spain, so that would indicate that it would have the infrastructure necessary to absorb the additional people. I also didn't see Madrid in any of the anti-tourist news stories, so I thought I was avoiding the anti-tourist hotspots by coming here to Madrid. But unfortunately, I think the anti-tourist sentiment has reached Madrid. I've been coming here since 2004, but I've seen the city change over the past 20 years and not always for the better. Check out our video on how Madrid is turning into a theme park to learn the specifics about how tourist traps cause the city to lose some of its authenticity, charm, and culture. Also, a lot of places are luxury markets and housing catering to the wealthy now. My former real estate agent said that the prices are so high, he's embarrassed to rent the properties his firm has on offer. Part 2. How this all affects me personally. Okay, story time. So my husband and I returned to Madrid this time, August 2nd, 2024, and we moved into our new flat, got settled, and about 2 days later, we were exiting our building, going down the stairs as a woman was starting to enter the building and pass us on the stairs. And I greeted her with a warm smile and the normal, hola, buenos dias. And she did not greet me back with the scripted response. Instead, she looked at the floor, shook her head, seemingly in disapproval, and just muttered under her breath. And about a week later, my second interaction with the same woman was a similar setup where I'm descending the stairs, this time without Chris. She's ascending. I greeted her with, hola, buenas tardes. And this time she greeted me back with the scripted response. I think she was maybe in a better mood. So the third interaction I have with her is August 17th. And so then I've been in the building at this point for about at least 2 weeks now. And I enter the front door of the building using my keys. I unlock the door and I feel a presence right behind me. And I turn around and look, and it's the same woman. And so I held the door for her so she didn't have to get her keys out. And I greeted her again with, hola, buenas tardes. And she asked me what I was doing in the building. And I said, I'm going to my flat because I live here. And she said, since when? And I said, August 2nd. And she said that she didn't notice me move in. And I said, oh, okay. Oh, vale, pues mi esposo y yo nos mudamos el 2 de agosto. I mean, I basically just repeated the move-in date. And she asked why she didn't notice us moving in. And I said, no sé, I don't know, because I don't know. And she said, well, where do you live? And I said, the flat on the second floor, el piso en la segunda planta. And she said that that apartment is illegal. And I responded with, de veras, ilegal. And she basically said, in essence, yes, you know that. You already know that, or you already know better, and that you should get yourself to a hotel. This building is for people who live there. This is people's homes. It's not a hotel, and I shouldn't be there. And then she ran up the stairs and slammed the door. I left Spain on October 3rd. 10 days later, tens of thousands of people marched through the streets of Madrid to demand a solution to the housing crisis. Okay, so this next section is about how various residents of Madrid responded to what happened. The owner/manager of the flat told me that it was not an illegal rental and that the woman's behavior was unacceptable. She told me that she reported the woman to the Association of Owners and the building's management and that the lady might be struggling with mental health problems. One of my Spanish friends responded by expressing a lot of empathy and compassion for both me and the resident who fussed at me. She explained that many tourist apartments are illegal, and they don't follow the regulations and pay the taxes that they should pay. She mentioned the bad behavior of many tourists, too, and that the numbers and behaviors of these tourists are destroying the soul of the city. She emphasized that I behave like a local and she doesn't consider me a tourist, rather that Spain seems to be a second home to me. My American friends had similar responses, saying they're sorry about what happened to me, but explaining the high cost of housing, overcrowding, and gentrification problem in Madrid. They also shared stories of tense interactions they've recently had with Spanish residents in Madrid residential buildings. While they were not told to go to hotels, they were questioned about what they were doing in buildings that they had every right to be in. They also explained how challenging it was for them to find housing. These American friends are residents of Madrid, not tourists. More on that later. Some pointed out that the problem might be how long I stay. We'll discuss short versus long-term stays later in the video. The rest of my friends who are residents of Spain had completely opposite reactions. Their reactions could be summarized as follows. I kid you not, this is actually what they said. Many of them are profiting off the tourists and immigrants. A Spanish architect said the Spanish need to stop complaining about the Mexican and Venezuelan immigrants buying up Salamanca. They're making him rich. His business would go bust without immigrants buying flats and hiring him to renovate them. Other Spaniards pointed out that they survive off tourists, that the Americans buy the most from them, that their businesses have expanded greatly and hired many more people. And it's great, actually, that people are buying up apartments and charging high rents, that they would like to do the same so they can work less. And these people are smart to profit off of the high rents, and some of them had already started buying second apartments and renting them out themselves. They asked if I could refer more Americans who want to rent short-term to them. Many Spaniards, in general, this time just seemed excited about selling things to me, which was new. Several Spanish residents and friends said that the older lady had no right to say what she said to me. They called her a Spanish Karen, said that she doesn't represent Spain, they're embarrassed by her treatment of me, and that she should apologize. They said if blame is to be laid, people should blame the government, greedy landlords who buy up too many flats, corporate landlords who buy up entire buildings and evict everyone, hotels who build on environmentally fragile land, and nature tourism that ruins hiking trails. They all checked in on me multiple times, invited me back to Spain, said I belonged in Madrid, and that I add value to the city. Warning, I have a lot of thoughts, like 30 minutes worth of thoughts. One of my main takeaways from everybody's reactions and responses to what happened was that this was not an isolated incident. I didn't just get unlucky and run across a disgruntled person who was taking it out on me. Rather, that this is an overall climate. There's a general atmosphere of tension. I was a little confused by the wide variety of reactions I got to the incident, and I want to unpack those, sort of go through them one by one and compare those responses to the actual facts, sort of separating fact from fiction. And I want to examine the real causes, the actual causes of the cost of living crisis. And I want to look at what's being done to address the issues and even propose maybe some other solutions. I also want to take this experience and the knowledge that I've gained from making this video to reflect on my own behavior and adjust my future travel behavior. I don't think anything the manager or owner of the flat told me was true. I don't think my neighbor was struggling with mental health problems. I think she was sick of the turnover in her building. Her reactions towards me were so different, probably because she thought I was 3 different people. She probably didn't recognize me each time. And if you look at the dates of those reviewing the Airbnb where I stayed, you can see that all the stays are short term. I just learned that a short-term rental is considered any stay that's shorter than 3 months. I could not find any evidence on Airbnb that the flat I had rented had a tourist license. All short-term rental properties must be registered with the Madrid City Council and obtain a tourism license number. This license number must be clearly displayed on all listings and advertisements for the property. To be eligible for a short-term rental license, the property must have a separate street entrance from any permanent residential units in the building. Renting out individual rooms or apartments within residential buildings with common entrances is prohibited. This rental shared a common entrance with the permanent residents of the building. Okay, so clearly I made some mistakes here. I wasn't a thoughtful traveler. I didn't look for these things like a tourist license or a common entrance, etc. And I probably shouldn't have rented in the city center either. It's true that I made mistakes, and this next section is also true. I just wanted to start by warning that there's no such thing as a perfect tourist, or immigrant for that matter, not in this climate. Your good behavior won't save you from being a target of criticism, blame, or suspicion. Your proof of residency won't either. Even if you did everything right and are living legally long-term in Spain. Reminder, all of those people who were questioned in and around their buildings in Madrid were residents. And I'm a former resident. I've had 2 Spanish visas. I've lived in Madrid twice. I have a Spanish bank account and was assigned a foreign social security number by Spain. I've received certifications in Spain and gone to university in Madrid. The woman who fussed at me didn't know any of this and didn't ask and probably doesn't care. This is because we're all impacting the city, tourist and immigrant alike, stressing it and changing it for better or worse. And when dramatic changes occur, those who suffer from the changes will look to blame someone, and sometimes that blame is misplaced. And the Spanish can't always tell the difference between a tourist and an immigrant. And also many people like me fall into this gray area between tourist and immigrant. I started off as an immigrant and then I converted to a tourist and then I converted back into an immigrant, then back into a tourist, and I don't really actually consider myself a tourist. I engage in slow travel where I stay in Spain for weeks or months at a time. And there are other people who are doing this slow travel thing. It's called the Schengen hop, where they stay 90 out of every 180 days. There are a group of countries in Europe that form the Schengen zone, and if you go to those countries, any one of them, without a visa, just with your passport, basically you can only stay for 3 months out of every 6 months. And so they leave that zone and then they come back in, and that's called the Schengen hop. These type of people, it's unclear what their status is. Are they really tourists? Because they're living there part-time, basically. They basically have 2 homes. And I'm going to introduce you to someone a little bit later who does that. Tourist is not really the right label for them. And then the reverse happens too, where a lot of people start off as tourists and they like the place they visit so much that they end up moving there and becoming immigrants. So there's a lot of overlap between these 2 populations of tourist and immigrant, and people are moving in and out of these statuses constantly. It's in flux. So I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to distinguish so much between tourists and immigrants. And that's why I titled the video, "Is Spain Sick of Foreigners?" instead of "Is Spain Sick of Tourists?" And distinguishing between a high quality tourist or immigrant and a low quality one is a bad exercise too. Every additional person strains the system just by their existence, but also adds benefits to the economy to varying degrees. And I'm not talking about the people who pee in fountains, right? Like, nobody likes them. I'm talking about most well-meaning travelers, and I consider myself in this category. Well-meaning travelers will find that it's actually pretty easy to make mistakes and accidentally engage in bad behavior if you don't look up local laws before you go, especially if they've recently changed, or you just have bad luck or lack common sense. And so I've made a list of some of the mistakes I've made in Spain. You won't be surprised to see some of the things on that list, like accidentally staying in an illegal Airbnb. The reason why it took me weeks to figure out that the flat actually was illegal was because we're Airbnb owners and we have to enter our social security numbers, and that's so that we pay taxes on the rental income that we get, and you can't upload the property without doing that. We could not imagine how somebody could post an illegal property on Airbnb. We didn't think that the platform allowed for that. It didn't even occur to me that that was a possibility. I didn't think I was on the dark web or something like that. So that's how I ended up making that mistake, probably more than once, actually.
The problem remains that there are already so many illegal vacation rental apartments operating throughout the country. A recent study in Madrid suggested that 98% of the Airbnbs, etc. in Madrid don't have a license.
Oops. If you look at this list, you might be surprised to see things like slipping and falling. Let me explain. During Storm Filomeno in 2021, we were warned to walk carefully over the icy ground because the hospital system was so strained with COVID patients that if you fell and broke or fractured a bone, you would probably have to wait a long time before you received care. And so I actually did slip and fall several times on the ice. And had I fractured or broken a bone, I would have put more stress on an already overburdened healthcare system. Even getting sick with private insurance in Spain means you're one more patient a doctor has to see. Public or private, you will be making the healthcare wait list longer, and there may be 6 Spaniards waiting for care behind you. Your length of stay isn't going to shield you from criticism either. I thought staying in Madrid long-term would be better than short-term. And by long-term, I meant a few months, and by short-term, I meant a few days. And my logic was I'd be spending more money in the city if I stayed for months, and I'd be contributing to less turnover in the building. I've also heard local news outlets complain about short-term tourists, like the cheap, boozy, fun and sun, cruise ship, park, beach kind of tourists. They come in for a few hours, they spend no money, and they go out. And they complain that those are the worst kinds of tourists. I figured if I stay for 12 weeks versus someone staying for 1 week, and I thought, well, one person is much easier to manage, you could get to know your neighbors instead of having these 12 individual strangers coming in and out of your building. That's not the only issue. The issue is that apartment cost about $3,000 or $4,000 per month. And a lot of the Airbnbs I rent are in that range. If I were to rent for a full year, the price would be much lower, probably around 2,000 euros a month or less. And so what happens is, if you're a landlord and you know you can rent to people like me who are willing to pay $3,000 to $4,000 a month, well, then more of you are going to start prioritizing people like me, and a bunch of the long-term leases are going to convert into short-term leases. So you might say, okay, I'm not going to rent, I'm just going to buy. But the same problem occurs when you go to buy luxury housing. Then a lot of the affordable housing is converted to luxury housing because it's just more lucrative to do so. And so you might say, okay, well, I am going to rent long-term at a reasonable price. Well, that's not problem-free either. So a problem arises when American immigrants snatch up the last few units of affordable housing. Those few affordable units could have gone to Spaniards who desperately need them. If you're born in a city and grew up there, maybe housing should be prioritized for you rather than recent arrivals who don't need to live in the city. They can just go back to their home country and live there. Americans don't need to be in Spain. It's a luxury and a privilege, not a right. Immigrant or tourist, we all disrupt the market by bringing in outside money from countries that pay much higher salaries. And I'm going to talk about the higher salaries in a few minutes. I have also heard people complain about poor immigrants who they fear will be dependent on public welfare or assistance and compete with natives for housing and jobs.
This is the challenge. I see the comments of saying, we don't... Look, I understand people's frustration, but a lot of that is also fake news. People believe that people are coming and getting benefits that they're not getting. And
marrying their women, can you believe?
I haven't heard that one. But there's so much misinformation about about people who come and move here, whether they're people with no money who want to work or with lots of money who want to invest, whatever it is, right? And it just gets people really emotional. And it's very hard to have a conversation about that.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So rich and poor newcomers are problematic, and so are varying lengths of stay. Maybe the issue is don't go to big cities. No, there's a whole movement pushing to repopulate vacant Spain. It's called España Vacía. And so maybe going to these smaller towns and pueblos that are losing population, maybe that would be more helpful. Spain needs immigrants. We'll get into that in a minute. But they don't want tourists and immigrants that are poor, and they don't want rich ones either. Both cause problems. So I think maybe a high quality tourist or immigrant, if we're going to engage in this bad exercise, is a middle-class person who stays the perfect amount of time in the perfect area outside of city centers and who spends the perfect amount of money. I didn't know if such an immigrant existed, and I thought I found one, actually. I thought Nicole from the YouTube channel Travel to Money was an example of a near-perfect tourist or immigrant, the kind that Spain would want. But she received so much criticism.
On Instagram, I've received comments from Spaniards telling me, "We don't want you here," or "Go back to America," or people calling me a colonizer.
For buying a $9,000 unlivable house in a remote location outside of a major city, hiring locals to repair it and buying local materials to make it attractive and then living in it. She waited 2 months to make sure the government didn't want the house. She doesn't really rent it out. She lets friends and families stay there, and all they have to do is pay the utilities. There was no demand or competition for the cheap houses she bought. Nothing was stopping locals from buying the $5,000, $9,000, and $11,000 house she bought.
Then I called the agent who was selling it, and he was like, you know, the house is okay, but the street is colorful. It's just not where most people want to live. Now, the real estate agent was right. My street, not the best. Basically, there are a group of Romani people, sometimes referred to as gypsies, who live in some of the homes on the street. Some of these families are no different than mine, but some of them live in a way that can be a bit off-putting at times. He was also correct in saying that I was safe. I've never had a situation where I felt unsafe. It's one of those places that I recommend if you want a great deal and a good view and don't mind the occasional frustration from the street. Anyway, the great thing about the street is that because the Spaniards look down on the gypsies, they don't want to have anything to do with any of the houses on the street, which opens up opportunities for expats who don't seem to mind as much.
The home ownership rate in Spain hovers around 75%. It's historically between 75 and 80%, which is about 10% higher than the home ownership rate in the US, which is about 65%. So US Americans like Nicole are not what's stopping Spaniards from owning homes. Now I am sure that there is no such thing as a perfect immigrant or high-quality tourist. If Nicole is receiving criticism, then no immigrant is doing it right. Okay, at least those criticisms are from Spaniards towards Nicole. Like, fine, fair enough. Like, the Spanish have every right to say whatever they want and feel however they want. It's their country. Who am I to tell them how they should feel? It's the criticisms coming from recent American immigrants towards Nicole that are particularly bizarre and hypocritical, in my opinion. I actually heard an American question what value Nicole brought to Spain and accused Nicole of being rich. Anti-tourism sentiment can quickly slip into anti-immigrant sentiment, even from other immigrants. I want to warn American immigrants not to pull up the ladder behind them. It can be incredibly tempting to want to be the only American in Spain or one of the few Americans there, because it makes you feel really special. You just want Spain to be for you and your few American friends, and all the other Americans must leave. I get it. Like, I get that, like, travel loses its luster when everyone starts doing it, right? Like, you leave the US to get away from Americans. I want to warn American immigrants to, especially the recent immigrants, to not be tempted to fall for this trap. Don't draw a line in the sand between yourselves and more recent arrivals, and between yourselves and tourists, or between yourselves and immigrants with less taste or more or less money, etc. You all are not so different. And should we really be questioning the value that immigrants bring to Spain or to countries in general? I mean, if that's an exercise that you want to engage in, okay, let's do it. Here are what the facts say about the value that immigrants provide to Spain. Skilled immigrants are helping Spain's economy outpace its European peers. Foreigners are helping to plug skill gaps in Spain's job market, especially in tech and hospitality sectors. This is an article, although it's a little older, it's from 2010. Evidence from Spain suggests that doubling the number of immigrants leads to a 10% increase in exports. I thought that was interesting. Spain's unemployment rate has fallen to its lowest since 2007, and data from the Spanish Statistical Office reveals that the country's GDP overall growth in 2023 was roughly 2%, outpacing growth in the Eurozone, which staggered behind at 0.7%. And Spanish GDP was growing at 3.5% in 2024, faster than even the US's economic growth for that year. The Economist actually chose Spain as the best economy in the world for 2024. Okay, so yeah, these numbers sound great, but that doesn't mean that immigrants are contributing to these numbers. Like, how can we tease this apart? How do we know? But research by Obra Social La Caixa highlights that 30% of Spain's GDP growth in the last 15 years has been caused by migrants settling in the country. And I'll link to that article. Since the start of the 21st century, Spain's population has grown by 8 million, and that's a rise of 20%, which is double the growth rate experienced by other countries that were members of the EU starting in 2000. All of this growth, all of it, was due to immigration, as the birth rate continues to fall and is now lower than the death rate. So here's the mechanism. Here's how it contributes to GDP. If you want to grow GDP, if you want to pay pensions for all the retiring boomers, you need to grow GDP in a different way to how we're growing it now, because there will not be as many people unless we bring them in through immigration, according to Professor Diaz Jimenez. Spain's central bank put a figure on the projected labor shortfall. In a recent report published in April, it said that the country will need around 25 million immigrants over the next 30 years. What does this have to do with Nicole, or me for that matter, but especially for Nicole? She's not an immigrant yet. She's doing the Schengen hop, right? And she hasn't necessarily started a small business that's employing Spaniards and scaled. And I get that, she's just bought some houses and fixed them up. What value does she provide? But I get the impression that she will be a Spanish immigrant one day soon. I think she's already providing value as a tourist or slow traveler, whatever you want to call her. Because this is a finance channel, I want to take a moment to distinguish between value creation and value appropriation. So here's a definition I'm going to throw up from the Journal of Applied Business and Economics. There's a lot of words in this definition, but basically value creation just means using resources to create something new that's useful. And then value appropriation is the process of distributing that existing value.
If you take value that someone else creates and appropriate the benefits for yourself, that's value appropriation. Rent seeking is a form of value appropriation.
And rent seeking doesn't literally just mean charging rents or charging very high rents for properties you rent out. It includes that, but it includes some other things. It's actually an economic concept that occurs when an entity seeks to gain wealth without making any contribution to the benefit of society. It often involves charging high rents, interest, or raising prices without improving the quality of products or service provided. From what I gather from Nicole's channel, she lets friends and family stay at her properties when she's not there, just charging them the bare minimum for utilities. So she's definitely not engaging in rent seeking. Is she creating value though?
Well, she bought 3 houses that cost between 5,000 and 20,000 euros that nobody else wanted and improved them using high quality local materials. She took what was unlivable and made it livable, what was an eyesore and made it beautiful, what was unusable and made it usable, all while spending local money and hiring local people in the process. I'd say that's value creation as opposed to appropriation or colonization. If she bought these houses and did almost nothing to them and then immediately flipped them, well, then that would be value appropriation. If she did the bare minimum renovation or a crappy renovation and then rented them out for a high price, well, then that would be closer to value appropriation. But she didn't do that. She did much more than that. Because she bought more than one house on the same undesirable street and then lived in those houses, she is contributing to revitalizing that street and inhabiting vacant Spain.
Also, I want to address the comments from Americans accusing Nicole of being rich. It's a weird accusation coming from wealthy Americans. Since this is a finance channel, I want to define what rich means. Like, first off, rich compared to who? Like, what's middle class, lower class, upper class in Spain versus the US? And with this first example, I'm going to compare American immigrants to Spain to other American immigrants to Spain. So basically, like, everyone in this example is American immigrant. The people doing the criticizing and the people being criticized. We'll get to the Spanish perspective in comparison in a few minutes. I created this table using exact figures from consular websites for the type of visas the criticizers have and from information Nicole has provided on her channel. She has been very transparent about her income and wealth on that channel, which made this table easy to create. For the last row, I estimated based on what I know about the personal finances of these people. What should be obvious from this table is that all these people are either roughly equivalent in income and wealth, or some of the Americans criticizing Nicole are actually higher income and wealthier than Nicole. Another thing I want you to pick up from this table is that it costs money to immigrate. Tens of thousands of dollars, actually. You have to prove with bank statements that you have at least $30,000 to $60,000 of liquid funds in your accounts to support yourself, depending on the time period the visa covers. Like many countries, Spain does not want immigrants to use welfare systems or become homeless, so they ask you to prove that you have the income to support yourself before they admit you. I had to show 12 months of bank statements for year 1 of my visa application. Those on non-lucrative visas are not allowed to work for the duration of their visas, which for these criticizers on the table is 5 years. For those on the digital nomad visa, they have to prove that they have about $2,600 per month in contracts from clients. These are mandatory minimums. Nicole does not have a visa, so she doesn't have to prove her finances to Spain. I think this is a case of an American with $60,000 in liquid accounts calling another American with $60,000 tied up in properties rich. Regardless, dear timid investors, do you think any of the Americans on this table are normal middle-class people? Does the average American have $30,000 to $60,000 sitting in liquid accounts? Can the average American take 5 years off of work? Let's find out. I think this Mexican woman's perspective on US Americans moving to Spain is interesting. She commented in one of my videos and started with a similar accusation as to what Nicole received on her Instagram reel, calling us white colonizers. She did not want me to encourage US Americans to move to Mexico, but she thought it was fine for us to move to Spain. To her, Spain and the US are both high-income countries, and the euro is a stronger currency than the dollar, so Americans are not disrupting the Spanish economy. I thought this was an interesting perspective and segue into comparing two high-income colonial countries to one another. I just showed you the stat that Spain has a faster growing economy than the US. So is this Mexican commenter right? What does it mean to be upper middle or lower income in Spain versus the US? So if you take a look at this chart, you'll notice that in some ways she's wrong, right? Because even within high income countries, there are differences. Average and median income and wealth is twice as high in the US as it is in Spain. However, Nicole would fall way under the Spanish and American mean and median income and wealth levels. Her American criticizers would fall a little above average Spanish income levels, considering the $30,000 a year minimum that they would have to prove. However, that's only if their income is proved by a monthly pension, Social Security, or clients, in the case of those on the digital nomad visa. In the case of the non-lucrative visa, many consulates do not accept 401ks or IRAs as proof of a means to support oneself. If visa holders have to prove their income via a lump sum, then no, the average American does not have $30,000 to $60,000 in bank accounts. That figure of $684,000 for American net wealth is largely coming from real estate and retirement funds, money that's tied up. Bankrate's latest survey results found that 56% of U.S. adults lack the emergency funds to handle a $1,000 unexpected expense, and 1/3 said they would have to borrow the money somehow to pay for it. And that household net adjusted disposable income figure of $51,000 is an average. Because there are more millionaires and billionaires in the US than most countries, The average US salary is higher because the extremely wealthy are pulling the average towards them. Even the median, a summary statistic that is less affected by extremes, will shift in the direction of the skews. Actually, income in every country is skewed right towards the rich. That's why I want to focus on this last box that covers the mode, or the most frequent salary, and the distribution of income. You will see that there are more extremely low wage earners, people who earn below $2,500 annually, and earners earning less than $20,000 in the US than in Spain. If my calculations are correct, Nicole's income falls below even the modal Spanish income. Based on her income alone, she would be considered a millerista in Spain. Milleristas are people who earn about 1,000 euros a month. Because Nicole owns property, this label doesn't quite fit her though. I couldn't find data on modal wealth, but if 75% of people are homeowners in Spain and the average home price is 600,000 euros and average household net wealth is $366,000, then Nicole's wealth also falls well below average wealth levels in Spain and the US, since houses are more expensive in the US. If the definition of middle class is someone who earns between 75% and 200% of the median income, then the upper class in Spain starts around $46,000 or 44,000 euros. In the US, the upper class would start at about $95,000.
Based on what is known about Nicole from her YouTube channel and these numbers alone, one might place Nicole in the lower economic class in Spain, unless she owns other properties or has other income streams that I don't know about. But she appears very educated, owns more than one property, and makes passive income, all variables that factor into social class. So I think she is more likely in the lower middle class rather than the upper lower class in Spain. Either way, Nicole is not rich by Spanish or American standards, though.
Compared to the rest of the world, however, Nicole is rich. If my estimate of her earnings is correct, then the $1,000 a month she makes means the maximum she could spend is $33 per day. These are the only countries where the average citizen can spend more than $20 per day. But by global standards, the Americans criticizing her are also rich.
The bottom line is, Nicole is not rich enough to disrupt the Spanish market. She actually fits right into her age bracket in Spain, as most Spaniards around Nicole's age own property. Economically, she is much closer to resembling the average Spaniard her age than the average American. So, is the Mexican commenter right? Are Americans living in Spain just a bunch of rich people living with other rich people? Well, the Mexican commenter is both right and wrong. Yes, it's true that Spain and the US are both high-income countries, but there are large differences even between high-income countries. A higher percentage of the US workforce earns more than the Spanish workforce, twice as much if we're talking about mean or median income. But a higher percentage of the US workforce earns less than the Spanish workforce. That is because the US is a place of extremes. The US is also twice as expensive as Spain, wiping out a lot of the salary advantage. Take a look at this cost of living table.
On average, Spain is 123% cheaper than the US. I'm sure you all are starting to see the problem here. Americans can take their higher salaries and move to Spain where they can live more cheaply, not because of the exchange rate, but because the cost of living is lower. This is a form of geographic arbitrage, and it's been on the news and on the tips of Spanish people's tongues all 2024.
I heard a group of women complaining about it in my gym locker room last summer.
But if you look at this chart again, you will notice that it doesn't consider the cost of education or owning a car in the US. When you factor in those costs, the US salary advantage is partially wiped out. That is why I have some doubts about the geographic arbitrage that so many Americans are accused of engaging in. Sure, the Americans earn higher salaries abroad, but they still have to pay their $500 per month student loan payment that Spaniards don't have. And while living in the US, they couldn't save as much either because they paid $450 per month for health insurance and about $800 per month for their car payment and car insurance for decades before they arrived in Spain.
Basically, it's complicated.
Also, even though Americans have been the target of much of the criticism, we are not the reason Spanish housing is so expensive. At least not the cost of purchasing a home or apartment. Maybe we have more to do with the price of rent going up, but not the cost of buying. While researching this topic, Americans weren't even on the lists of top buyers in Spain. In 2023, foreign buyers comprised less than 15% of homeowners in Spain. I managed to find Americans in 15th place on this list of the top foreign buyers. According to the information I could find, Americans comprise 2% of foreign buyers, not 2% of all homeowners in Spain or all home buyers, but 2% of the 15% of foreigners who purchase property in Spain. So Americans comprise 0.3% of the total homeowners in Spain. Not 3%, 0.3%, as in less than 1%. So why did I bring all this up and go into so much detail? I mean, besides the fact that it's a great way to combine immigration, personal finance, and travel, the three main topics of this channel. Well, if you remember about 30 minutes ago in the video, I expressed some confusion about the dramatically different reactions I got from my Spanish versus American friends. And I think I finally figured out why. My Spanish friends are secure in just about every way. I think I am friends with a sample of upper middle class Spanish residents, so there is some selection bias there. They earn enough to solidly place themselves in the upper middle class in Spain. They own property or are inheriting property. Even if they lose their jobs, they won't be deported. They either benefit from the tourism and immigration or are unaffected by it because of where they live. My American friends, however, are at the mercy of the Spanish immigration system. One mistake or administrator in a cranky mood, and they can be sent back. They have not yet bought property in Spain, but have expressed that they have hopes and dreams to buy one day. For those on the digital nomad visa, if they lose their clients, they have to return to the US, which is not that great of a place to live these days. They all also live in or near the center of Madrid, the most expensive, heavily populated, and touristic place in Spain. They feel less secure than my Spanish friends and are more negatively affected by the tourism. People are more likely to be kind and empathetic if they are operating from a position of security and less negatively impacted. And in defense of my Spanish friends, why shouldn't they benefit from tourism and immigration? If anyone should benefit, it should be the Spanish themselves. I think the problem is that the benefits are not widespread enough, but the drawbacks are, and those drawbacks fall disproportionately on immigrants and the unemployed, underemployed, and/or young Spaniards. I actually went into all this detail because I want to warn Americans in Spain not to turn Madrid into my hometown in Central Florida. Every week, I visit our small town's community page, and it is full of residents saying, "Don't come here, we're full," or "Florida is full, stay where you are," to people who are moving into my town from just another state, county, or city. They could be coming even from a neighboring city or county just 20 minutes away, and hundreds of my town's residents will tell them they are not wanted and to go somewhere else. My hometown just hit 40,000 people, and its community page has more than 30,000 people in it. We are not full, and this behavior is very unwelcoming. Don't turn Madrid into my small town by bringing your unwelcoming American attitudes to Spain. Should I walk through my neighborhood questioning the immigrants about how much they paid for their houses and explain to them that they are part of the reason the cost of living went up? My town is rapidly gentrifying. I live between Orlando and Daytona, two of the most over-touristed places in the country. We are starting to experience traffic congestion, competition for parking, packed restaurants that never required reservations before but do now. More than 140 million tourists visit my state each year, at least 40 million more than visit Spain annually, and Florida has only half the population of Spain. Should I start questioning the tourists about what they are doing here? Because this is where Spain is headed if something isn't done. Florida has a good method of keeping the tourists out of the residential areas, so maybe that's something that Spain could copy. We can discuss potential solutions in the next section. Before we do, I just want to take a moment to share my values, which are displayed by this poster. I'll leave it up at the end of the video in case you want to read them. I'd like to encourage American immigrants in Spain to embrace some of these values. The Spaniards I know already do. And I hope the woman who told me that I don't belong sees this poster one day and, inspired by it, has a change of heart. But if she doesn't, that's okay too, I guess. So what's being done to fix the actual problems? I'll address that in the next video because this video is already too long. In the meantime, please watch Johnny's video that reviews 12 reforms Spain is considering or has already started enacting to deal with the cost of living crisis and over-tourism. Until then, hasta luego, timid investors!